What's going on, everybody? Happy, what's it called? Happy, 1 second.
Midway through
What's
the
going on?
year.
Yeah, happy halfway point. Sorry, I just got distracted by something else completely. Yeah, what's going on, people? Happy halfway point of the year. It is officially weekend after 4th of July. We are here to talk about two horror movies that kind of dropped throughout the halfway point. So this is a little bit of a horror double feature. We have Maxxxine and we have Longlegs, both from the rival indie studios that are currently vying for our attention right now in order to see like who is the top dog, who is the dominant mainstream studio. We have Maxxxine from A24 and we have Longlegs from Neon. At the end of this episode, we're also going to be going through our top 5 favorite movies from 2024 so far, as this is the halfway point. A little bit of a weirder de facto halfway point episode that we had last year. But Kristen, happy to have you on again once more. Excited to talk about these movies.
I am. I love horror, so this is like my cup of tea right here.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, to say the least, especially given like everybody's reaction going into these movies versus kind of coming out. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. All right, Kristen. So we got Maxxxine and we have Longlegs this weekend, right? So it's kind of interesting how the state of horror has evolved, honestly, especially given like the post-COVID everything. Like we were really getting shaped up with, obviously, you know, with Blumhouse kind of setting the tone, and then A24 kind of came in and took over it at the end of the 2010s. Then coming into the 2020s, it's been a little bit of like, okay, like who really are the horror icons now? If anything, you know, Jordan Peele is kind of like, I would say, retreated a little bit, and he's kind of become a little bit more of like the M. Night Shyamalan, where he doesn't necessarily want to get pigeonholed into doing horror necessarily, but and so he's kind of just like focused on just doing these oddball, wacky, weird, original concepts that he wants to do. Will they ever measure up to being as good as Get Out? Probably not, but at the end of the day, I'm just happy to have somebody who is mostly invested in doing their own original ideas. So we have Maxxxine and we have Longlegs. Maxxxine technically opened last weekend, but it was 4th of July. So, you know, we were kind of all busy with our individual 4th of July festivities. So I guess just what's interesting about Maxxxine is that Maxxxine is, in order to kind of start this off, Maxxxine is a little bit of a weird one in the sense of this is not technically a horror original. It is technically a continuation of two movies that were also previously released by Ty West back in 2022. You had X, which was released in March. It was kind of a surprise smash hit. And then you had Pearl, which was a follow-up prequel that was released only 6 months later in September. Before we actually get into Maxxxine, talk to me about your thoughts of like when you first saw Maxxxine and Pearl in theaters and what your thoughts were on them.
Well, I remember seeing X like back when it was released, like in 2022, and I thought this is like the old school 70s horror films that I knew of. Like it gave me pure Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes, and I think that's what was missing from modern horror. So we got to experience that, and with great performances all around, and for it to stand like as one of the most unique projects from 2022. And then immediately right after seeing that, I was like, I'm in love. And if there's room to tell the story, and immediately, you know, Pearl was announced and that it was already shot, it was already filmed, and script was written with Mia Goth, with Ty West. And then September 2022 came out, and I was like, okay, not as good as X, but I still loved it. But then rewatching actually again, I was like, X is still superior, I think, to Pearl, because Pearl only like stands out because of of Mia Goth. So I remember loving it when I saw it in theaters, and now the build up to Maxxxine, it was pretty exciting because of how great X and Pearl were. And I went with a group of people, and we were all excited to see it, to see how this was going to conclude. And I think a majority of us were entertained, but ultimately let down.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So kind of where my story with it goes is that X, when I saw it, right, it was kind of weird because it was coming out of 2021, going into 2022, and 2021 was so weird and interesting because you had the HBO Max lineup, right? And in a way, that kind of ended up becoming the event slate of the whole year in the sense of, okay, at the very least, regardless of what else came out, what went to theaters and whatnot, you knew that you were getting a slate of movies, at least one each month that you at least had to look forward to. And a decent amount of them were premium titles, you know?
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing is that outside of that slate, the rest of the movies were kind of disappointing and kind of letdowns. You know, Netflix had their slate. Obviously, A24 had their slate and everything set up. But a majority of those movies were kind of letdowns. And so what I think is kind of fascinating is, so going into 2022, you have X. X is really, if you want to make the argument, it's kind of the first big movie event of the summer, really. And I remember being like just really excited and being like, whoa, like, what is this movie? Where did this come from? And why have we been missing these kinds of movies throughout?
Right.
I really thought, I'm like, okay, A24 is back. I think I watched it only like 2 weeks before I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, which obviously won Best Picture that year.
Right.
And I was officially of the mindset of like, movies are back. Then, of course, the rest of 2022 happened. But what I loved about it so much, besides obviously just the throwback to, like I said, the grindhouse exploitation era horror movies, is that I'm like, oh, this is like, feels like a film. This doesn't feel like a movie. Like, this feels like it was shot on analog film. It feels dirty. It feels gritty. It feels like, you know, kind of grimy in a weird way.
Like I was saying earlier, it was like that old school feel of like the 70s horror films.
Right. But even more than that, I thought what was even better is kind of how it was kind of a flip on the scenario, right? Because going into it, right, the setup for that movie is that you have these six people that are going on to shoot this like mini indie movie, you know, this grindhouse exploitation.
Not just any indie film, let's just put it out there.
Shoot a porno, an extra movie on this farm run by these two old people. And you're thinking like, okay, this is a classic formula. I've seen this before. These old people are gonna come in and they're gonna be like, oh man, these kids are up to no good, you know, making their dirty movies and such. And there's a heavy religious overtone. And then the twist at the end is like, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's just the crazy old woman, also played by Mia Goth, an old woman makeup, is just super jealous of them currently and like is angry that like, oh, why do they get to be young and pretty and I'm not? And if anything, I would say that like that movie is kind of as good as it was and is like kind of fully fleshed out. There is a feeling of like incompleteness that in a way Pearl actually kind of complements, in the sense of Pearl, despite being much more so a horror show, a showcase of Mia Goth's talent rather than being a straight up movie. I still think Pearl's very compelling in the sense of providing this interesting backstory for this antagonist that we really didn't see coming. And then obviously, you know, with the success of those two movies, Ty West announced that he's planning on doing a third movie that they're going to start filming. Obviously, I believe it was supposed to come out in 2023 before the strikes pushed it to this year. And he said that this was going to be a continuation of X, following Mia Goth's character Maxxine, who's the only survivor in that movie. What's it called? And he's like, and you hear the announcements obviously going into this one. It's going to be a lot bigger. It's going to be a lot more Hollywoodized. You got like a massive supporting guys. You got Elizabeth Debicki, Bobby Cannavale, Michelle Monaghan, Kevin Bacon, Giancarlo Esposito, Halsey, Lily Collins, all these people that are in this movie. And so I went into it, right? I'm not going to say I was like super excited, because also I watched Pearl. I actually didn't watch Pearl when it came out in theaters. I watched Pearl.
Oh, really?
I saw Pearl the night before Maxxine came out, and I watched it. I was ready. I'm like, okay, Ty West has shown that he knows what he's doing when it comes to like paying homage to the masters, right? And I was really, really excited. I'm like, yes, this is going to be it. This is going to be it. And I came out and I'm like, that was aesthetically pleasing. Definitely. It was really interesting. I don't know if I loved it as much as the first two. And in fact, the more I think about it, I'm like, it might be the weakest. Does that make it a bad movie? No. And especially given that I have to give Ty West enormous props for being able to pull off, first of all, the fact that this is A24's A24's first series, which is kind of insane, and interesting how no one's talking about that. But also the fact that Ty West has pulled off a largely original trilogy that's not tied to any pre-existing IP, already existing IP.
Right.
So I really thought that was cool and fascinating to begin with. But Kristen, so you and I talked about kind of our initial thoughts after this. So we're like, we liked it, but why don't we love this? And so I guess kind of fill the audience in on what your thoughts on that are.
Okay, so let's get the cat out of the bag, I think, because Mia Goth is just so talented.
Oh, yeah.
She's excellent in this.
Yeah.
And What ultimately felt disappointed is a lot of the storytelling elements. Like, I think when walking in, the tape that was filmed on the property from what we saw in X was going to make a prominent role in what we see in the trailers, and it doesn't. Yes, it's focused on the serial killer, but there was intentions of the tape being like the huge thing that was going to possibly destroy her career and what she's building up towards in Hollywood. So there was that, but everything else I want to say just also is great is just the cinematography, costume design is on point. I mean, A24 is already selling the Maxxxine jacket. I mean, that jacket that she wears is incredible. It helps her stand out with her character. All the supporting cast is really great. But if you're going in, I will say to watch for Halsey and Lily Collins, you're not going to get that because it's pretty much straightforward cameos. But I do love Giancarlo Esposito. I think what he has given to work on this film is phenomenal. It shows he's also a great villain from what we see from all of his TV credits and even video game credits where you want to, see him in that. Like, he's just so talented, even here with his ties with Maxxine, like how he's going to protect her. And also, I don't know if you mentioned, Kevin Bacon is also in this film, and he's also just pure 80s.
Pure camp.
Pleasing.
It's camp.
Pure camp. He's got this cheesy ball factor to him, and he is more enticing as like a villain than who the serial killer actually is in the film. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
I loved what the material he was given, and I love the scene, especially at the Psycho House where they filmed it. I think that's so incredible that they were able to film on like the Paramount lot, which was like incredible to see. And then they just did, kind of like a Norman Bates kind of like chase in a way. It was really well done. Like, a lot of sequences were aesthetically pleasing, and the editing was really great here. It's just ultimately for me, from seeing how everything was executed, it felt very predictable, and nothing had like stood out from what we seen with X or with Pearl. Yes. Pearl was just like kind of like, okay, well, she could do this, or in X they could do this, but you didn't know why, the old woman and the guy were going to kill each other, like kill everybody. But Maxxine, it's just so pretty much forward, straight serial killer film, and you kind of follow beat for beat what's going to happen, even though it's very entertaining.
Yeah, so my thought process here is that there were kind of two directions that this movie could have gone, kind of similar to Hitman in a weird way when I talked about that a month ago, which is where you have the direction where you could go that actually makes this a lot more interesting than the sum of its parts. And then there's direction they chose to go for the movie itself. And I'm not saying that the direction they chose for the movie is bad.
No.
But it definitely leaves a lot to be desired on the table. For instance, I think that with this one more than the first two, I would say, I feel that Ty West let kind of the genre and sensibilities kind of overtake the storytelling, because there is an interesting version here. First of all, I did want to say that I love how, in addition to kind of making each of these three movies a distinct homage to genre, the first X to 70s exploitation, Pearl to like 1950s melodramas with a sickening twist on that. Now this one too, 80s.
The Technicolor.
Yeah, exactly.
Pearl, I love it.
Yeah, versus this one, much more 80s, much more giallo, much more Argento. Also a lot of influences to Brian De Palma here. There's some sequences that feel ripped right out of Carrie. So I thought that part was really, really well done. My problem is that, so these movies are all centered around kind of specifically the effects that fame can have on women, right? That's what's so interesting, both about seeing Maxxine and Pearl and kind of their respective struggles. And now you see kind of in this one, Maxxine kind of succeeded at getting the life that she always wanted. But obviously the overhanging threat of, okay, her past is going to catch up to her, both with everything that happened on the farm and X, and also potentially some things that happened before that. And so the seeds are laid pretty obviously, which is where, okay, all the girls that are dying in this movie are all going to this one party at this one house in the
hill. It's so funny how they're all connected to like, oh, we're going to a producer's house. I'm like, And it's like you see how they're all going to the same house.
Right.
It's like, girl, you're really going to go after
Exactly.
that same producer with all the clues leading up to it.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's the first problem right there. Is it's like, okay, she never puts together that they're all going to the same house. So I'm like, okay, listen, at the beginning of the movie, I understand she's focused on her own life. She doesn't really care about any of these girls. She's like, the thing that I like that they continue from the Maxxine character that's established in X is that she is only focused on her own career and her own goals going for it. Very self-centered. Everybody is fodder to her. Everybody is just a stepping stone in order to get to the next stage. You know, she does not care who she literally stamps on a dude's balls when he's about to rob her at knife point in an alley. Like she is not fucking around when it comes to getting.
I think that was wasn't it like a Buster Keaton lookalike or something?
I think so. Yeah, something like that.
Because she said something like Buster, and it was like, I was like, okay, isn't that supposed to represent somebody that we know in Hollywood?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. But the biggest thing for me was that I feel like the movie's biggest flaw is that as good as it did with setting up and continuing Maxxine from her character in X, I don't think it did a good enough job with the moral ambiguity, because there's a certain point where I think the movie is trying to make you think that she might be responsible for these murders, which I'm like, okay, if that was the case, that would have been 1,000 times more interesting, because
it would have been daring for the story itself. I mean, building up to why she's doing it. I mean, maybe to get her competition out of the way.
Exactly.
And that would have been more enticing to see, because that's how kind of like Pearl was. I mean, she took out her sister-in-law, remember?
Exactly.
And that's like seeing how they both are connected, especially seeing like how the ending of X is, where like Mia Goth is about to kill the old woman, and essentially also Mia Goth, it's just saying, the iconic quote that she says, "I will not accept all that, all that spiel." You're gonna see like, okay, these two really are connected. They're both sick in the head, but no, it's just like not that at all.
Exactly, not that at all. Which leads us, unfortunately, to the ending. Like I said, there, and the other annoying thing too is when you really think about it too. Even before you get to the ending and the dude who's actually responsible for all the murders in the movie, it kind of makes Kevin Bacon's character irrelevant if you think about it. So he's literally just there to take up and waste time, because I'm like, okay, think about it, right? If in the world where Maxxine is not necessarily responsible, but could be being set up for the murders, that makes Kevin Bacon a much more important and instrumental character, because if he's going around following her, he could be the one like kind of courting these girls and setting them up and everything and sending them up to the mansion, and then he's following around and framing her, and that makes him. But as he stands in the movie, okay, she rejects him and smashes his car. He gets mad at her and chases her around a set. And then her and Giancarlo Esposito, who plays her agent in the movie, just entrap him and crush him. And that's it. And then the next thing, it's like, oh, okay, time to go and confront the bad guy.
Yeah, given what Kevin, like I was saying before, given the material he was given, it works, but for the consequences of like what you're just saying, it doesn't make sense of why he was at it. It was like, he could have been a character who could have been good, but I don't think it would have been as exciting,
Yes.
And I kind of think maybe now as we're talking, that's probably why he was added, to add more and star power.
And also the obvious 80s element too, where Kevin Bacon obviously came up as a teen star throughout the 80s and Friday the 13th and Footloose. So yeah, exactly. So it's a glaring example of things happening because they need to happen, rather than the events of the movie prompting what happens next. Like, to me, there's nothing that's forcing Maxxine to go up to that house at the end. There really, really isn't, if you think about it. So that leads us to, albeit a very entertaining, but kind of an out of nowhere third act, where, okay, you can make the argument that, the seeds are set up with the tape and everything and with the killer, because obviously, I mean, once you see the killer, they show off too much of the killer's frame too, to be like, okay, that's clearly not Maxxine, And I think that there were some ways where you could have shot it to make it a little bit more subtle, make it be like, oh, it could be her, Like, because the movie is very clearly at the beginning trying to make you think, oh, she's responsible for these murders. And then the twist ending comes when she goes up to the house, she confronts the perpetrator, and it's a very, very entertaining, over-the-top performance. It feels like a performance out of a completely different decade.
Yeah.
And it's just her dad, who is a preacher and is part of a cult that's being like trying to, that they're at the whole movie, right?
Trying to exploit, saying Hollywood is bad, kind of like what you
well, that's the irony, right? Well, that's the irony, right? Is the fact that throughout the movie you have these alt-right, protesters that are protesting against all the Hollywood studios who are being like, oh, Hollywood is bad. Stop, showing all this pornography and all this.
Brainwashing our
You're
children.
brainwashing our children. The same tired, age-old process you've seen. And then she goes up there to confront the guy who turns out to be her dad, the killer, who is revealed to have been luring all these women to this house and then trying to put them in this like ritual to renounce Satan and all that. And it's supposed to, and it tries to be like this grand overarching statement on the essence of evil in Hollywood. And then the two cops portrayed by Bobby Cannavale and Michelle Moynihan show up. They both get shot and killed in the crossfire, but they kill all the cult members. Maxxine confronts her dad, blows his head off. That's it. It just ends. And that was
it's
like, okay.
So left field on what we were giving, and just like what you said, it feels like a different film. And that's when I almost really felt like, and I think that's what a majority of people are kind of like coming out of this movie. And I was surprised, like seeing now critics like saying, oh, this is the best like trilogy, yada, yada. I think with the consequences of like the actions of like what Maxxine has in this film, like consequences, I mean, just like what Ty West put together for this, it doesn't make it an ultimate great trilogy personally. No. It's more of a letdown, and you can kind of say that to me. I was like thinking back, I was like, okay, what's like a trilogy where it has a disappointing ending? And I think that's like what I think too is like the Scream franchise films, because the first two, great. And then when you find out with the third film and the stuff going on with that, Scream 3 is the weakest one. As much as you want to say that's a great trilogy as well. I know as a huge Scream fan, we talked about the Scream movies on your show before.
Yes, we did.
And that's not the most perfect trilogy. They're fun, just like the Maxxine X trilogy, whatever you want to call it. They're all entertaining and fun, but with the I don't want to say bad, but a disappointing ending.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree. And we haven't even gotten a chance to talk about Elizabeth Debicki's character, but that's another one where it's like, okay, so Elizabeth Debicki is kind of positioned as like her mentor figure. She's like the one who recognizes her talent and is like, okay, I like this actress. I'm gonna work with her and I'm gonna turn her into the star that she always wants to be. But we're also gonna like make this feminist statement as far as like, okay, being like, two powerful women making a difference in the industry that mostly is trying to crush us down and crush down creativity. And other than being like this pretty imposing and pretty strict female director, I mean, it's a good performance, but like she doesn't really have that much to do. And that's kind of ultimately what is the problem of this movie, is that a lot of people in this movie are ultimately left with spots that aren't without much to do. And they're left with like interesting positive characters. Like I love how Bobby Cannavale's whole thing is like, yeah, he came out here because he wanted to be a cop in movies and TV shows. And instead he ended up becoming a real cop. So I thought that part was great. And the whole, like there's a lot of, like, potential, like, Giancarlo Esposito's agent character and everything going on with him. And it just feels like a lot of wasted potential, I feel like. And
especially what I was saying with Halsey and Lily Collins. It's like Lily Collins' character could have had given more material, because I loved the scenes when she was under the wing of Maxxine when she visited the set as she was reshooting the Puritan scenes. That's the movie Maxxine is working on. And they were like, she calls her the wrong name. It was like, we could have had more of this. Like, this would have been so entertaining. And then when you find out later on, I was like, Elizabeth Debicki says, oh, she was just, Lily Collins is not like star material. You are like star material.
Right.
Like, do you imagine a fight between Lily Collins and Maxxine?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that would have been so entertaining to see.
And instead we get one shot of Lily Collins doing a silent scream in her trailer, and then,
Yeah, and then
she's
her
dead.
head's on the ground. Honestly,
she's dead in the next scene. It's like, okay, like, what are we doing here? Yeah, so ultimately, after a pretty great build-up 2 years ago with X and Pearl, I gotta say, kind of a disappointing letdown. I wasn't a super big fan of this. Still an incredible performance from Mia Goth, to say the least. But yeah, overall, I gotta say, X is another one that, like, I was originally giving this 4 stars. This is like a 3.5 for me at best, and it's really saved by the performances and the tone and the mood. But overall, yeah, like I said, it's kind of a letdown, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, A24 is having a really rough year. I think we've discussed this.
Yes, we have.
And, this is like one of the letdowns, I mean, I'm trying to think which one I would prefer more to watch over again. Is that Civil War or Maxxine? I think entertainment-wise, I would want to say Maxxine, but I think the better film overall is Civil War.
I mean, if I'm going to go really out of left field, I would say for me personally, the best A24 movie this year has been I Saw the TV Glow, and that's not saying much.
Like I still haven't watched it yet. It just came out, I think, and I still haven't watched it yet.
It's
I
the
still haven't
only-
watched Problemista yet either.
Problemista was fun. Problemista was a lot of
Okay.
fun. The thing about that I'm noticing about A24 going forward into the 2020s is I'm having a lot more fun with their more experimental movies than with their quote unquote more mainstream movies, because their mainstream movies, I'm sorry, they have not been working for me. Love Lies Bleeding, I thought was just okay. Civil War, I am straight up saying, no, this is a bad movie. It's not even a mid movie. It is a bad movie. And now with Maxxxine, I'm like, it's a letdown, you know? And I mean, what else do we have to look forward to this year? I mean,
From
I haven't
A24, we got Sing Sing, we got Janet Planet, which both are out,
Right,
but
both are
not
out.
to a wide
Right.
audience yet.
I still want to watch Tuesday because that looks interesting enough. The Heretic movie with Hugh Grant looks pretty good.
That's like, I think, the next mainstream,
Yeah.
what they're trying to push next. And I think it's probably going to be, hopefully, very promising.
Yeah, that one. And then I will say the comedy Y2K that Kyle Mooney is directing and starring in with that cast does actually sound very entertaining. And I'm hoping that one's good. I'm hoping that one could be like the bodies of this year. Fingers crossed. But what's your final thoughts to star rating on Maxxxine before we move on to Longlegs?
I think Maxxxine, I'm going to give it to you the same score as like a 3.5. I'm giving this like maybe like a B minus, like given how much I was entertained, but it just like that third acting, just, you know, everything that consequences basically with the storytelling of like what it builds up to, it just builds up to nothing really. So, and just it being predictable, it's just like kind of a letdown for someone who really loved, like myself, who really loved the two previous films. So yeah. Try again, Ty West. But
Try again. I'll be interested to see what he does next, to say the least. Like I said, he impressed me, to say the least. It's not like,
he's been making movies for a while, so he finally caught the attention of mainstream. So.
Yes, he did. Finally, took him long enough. All right, so now we're moving on to Longlegs. Like I said, the opposing studio. So where he is, I feel like A24 has kind of been floundering this year specifically, and also kind of post 2020 in the strike. Neon, man. They have been killing it. What is it? Palme d'Or winner at Cannes 4 years in a row or something like that with Titan, Anatomy of a Fall, Triangle of Sadness, which I don't think is deserved at all. And now this year, not at all. And then this year, with potentially with I can't remember with Anora, Sean Baker's new movie. I'm very, very excited for that one. And so we have this one come. So now we have the release of this one. This is the next movie from Osgood Perkins, who ironically got his start with A24. It's a lesser known movie that came out at the beginning of
Daughter.
Exactly, The Black Coat's Daughter.
Not a great film either, I must say. Don't really check that out.
But still, whatever works ultimately. So he got to start with that. And then for me, he caught my attention with a movie that came out actually in 2020 that unfortunately had the unfortunate, it was just unfortunately came out in February of 2020, so it didn't really have a chance before it kind of got overlooked. Which is his take on Gretel and Hansel with Sophia Lillis, and I really, really just loved his approach to that movie. I really, really did. I thought
seen that one yet.
Aesthetically, possibly the best the most aesthetically pleasing movie of 2020, at least that I saw. Like I love the way that he is able to construct and have such a classic feeling vibe, which I really, really love. He's not afraid to just set the camera and have these very wide shots and just let it sit and let just the overwhelming dread kind of come in. And he takes that approach that he took with Gretel and Hansel and he replicates it here in a movie that I basically describe as being Fincher mashed together with Kubrick. Oh, man. So you have this movie, Longlegs. And also, one other thing that I forgot to mention about him, he is also technically a Nepo baby, as his father is none other than Psycho actor Anthony Perkins, who obviously originated.
This also goes back to what we were just talking about with Maxxxine, with the Psycho house.
With the Psycho house. Nepo baby. So there's a little bit more connection here. So Longlegs is a movie that stars Micah Monroe as FBI agent Lee Harker, who displays inexplicable intuition during a case which causes her boss to place her onto a decade-spanning case of a series of brutal murder-suicides that have involved families throughout the state of Oregon. And each incident had the father murder the wife and child before taking his own life. And at the end of each crime scene is a letter with this cryptic satanic coding, which is signed Longlegs. Longlegs, the killer himself, being portrayed by Nicolas Cage in, once again, another scene-stealing performance. Like, I don't know about you, but talk about a guy that has just reclaimed his spot with really a true late career turnaround, being Nicolas Cage. Again, some incredible performances, from what's called Lovecraft County In 2020, you have the triple impact of Willy's Wonderland, Pig, and Prisoners of the Ghostland. In 2021, you've got Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. In 2022, it technically even got started with Mandy, I would say, in 2018. I don't think he had anything last year, but man, Cage has been on a roll.
Renfield was last year.
So. Renfield, that's the one I was forgetting about. Renfield, which not a good movie, but he's the best part about it.
I love that movie.
Yeah, I thought that movie was kind of just okay, but he was fantastic in it. I mean, your thoughts on Cage's like late career turnaround first and foremost, because I've been loving it so far.
You also can't forget about Gene Dream Scenario as well, which is really great as well, and earned him a Golden Globe nomination. I think this is probably one that's going to defy his career in the 2020s, because this is something you want to see from Nicolas Cage, given how big his personality is and big he is. Like, he is like one of those committed actors, and he can get audiences really excited because he always takes on different roles, much like our favorite actors we see to this day, like Ryan Gosling. Like, this is one that you want to pay money to see Nicolas Cage like ultimately transform, because this man is not Nicolas Cage. He is the unmost recognizable actor you will see right now. And like, you thought Mia Goth was unrecognizable in X. I mean, Nicolas Cage looks like an absolute ghost in this film.
He becomes the Joker. And
it's horrifying. Like, I'm going to put this out here right now. Best horror film Nick Cage has ever done.
I agree. But granted, that's not a very high bar, considering that, like, what are the other horror movies that he's been in? I mean, Mandy,
Wicker Man.
I don't know if Mandy qualifies as a horror movie. I feel like that's more of like a revenge exploitation movie. And then what? Wicker Man? Like, come on.
Wicker Man, it's like, this is like defining him as an actor. I think if I was an Oscar person writing a ballot out, nominate this guy.
Yeah.
He is terrifying and good, and just like, the scene alone, the interrogation scene, this is just like perfect monologue here from what we see from Nicolas Cage, where he just gives it his absolute all and entertaining as hell.
Yeah. Cage is great in this movie, to say the least. But I mean, it's like, okay, Cage is playing a satanic devil-worshipping serial killer. It's like, okay, it's everything that you want from him as a performer.
Exactly.
Because and the thing that I love so much about this kind of new wave of Nicolas Cage movies that we're getting is not only is he getting directors that challenge him as an actor. Obviously, we know everything that happened with him in the 2010s. The fact that he was just doing all those straight-to-DVD movies in order to pay off the massive amount of debt that he had. But what I think is really interesting and unique is, in a way, the memification that kind of happened with him in the 2010s kind of helped him, because since that seems to be the driving force of what makes what causes Hollywood executives to make the decisions that they do in terms of greenlighting the original projects that they do. What it allows somebody who may have been overlooked after having kind of, I would say, 2 decades of like some pretty big misses, to finally be like, oh no, this dude does have some talent. He just hasn't been being utilized in the right way. And with these recent string of movies that we've seen, is we finally see him being utilized in the right way. They're like, he loves to play insane and over the top.
He loves
let
crazy
him be insane and over the top. Exactly. And that's exactly what he gets. And what's even better about this instance specifically, even more, is all those other movies that I said before, he's the lead of. This movie, he's not the lead of. And I think it's the best possible thing, because not only do we get arguably one of the best Nicolas Cage performances we've ever gotten, but we get him sporadically throughout the movie. We're not spending every frame and every minute, and honestly, it helps the movie, because
it builds up to those moments where we're gonna get to him.
Forget the build up, the opening scene alone. Holy shit! Like,
when that scene is so daring, and I never felt chills in a film before like that in the first 5 minutes. Like, what Oz did, like with the opening, scene with it's revealed, it's Micah Monroe's, self, and then, the mother, and, I'm not sure if I'm spoiling.
Not yet. Not yet. Yeah.
It's Nicolas Cage, and it's just that quick shot of him, and just the voice of him alone and what he's saying. I never felt so many chills before, and just
it's the jump cut.
Scare. It's that jump cut.
It's the utilization of the jump cut. So rather than having him walk out and be surprising, instead it's like it immediately cuts to him, and you're like, oh, like I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Honestly,
earned. Things felt earned for this film, especially all the scares, and that's what I'm giving a lot of credit for this movie. Each scare felt earned.
Yes. Not only each scare, but like the way that it's framed and the way that it's set up is rather than having everything feel like close quarters and tight and intimate and the camera's moving around nonstop, instead it feels very classical and old fashioned. The camera is set at wide angles. It lets you take in the scenario. It lets you see things from a distance and lets the dread grow. That tracking shot in the beginning of when you see Micah Monroe go outside of her house and then she turns around and she sees Cage in the house, that epic shot in the trailer, and then she goes back inside. Oh my God, it's so good. And the movie just keeps building and building. As far as the Fincher comparisons go, I mean, this is almost directly a riff on Seven. I would say, like, I watched Seven recently. It's very, very similar plot base. With what, and I do like Micah Monroe's character. I love her as kind of the whole fish out of water instance. I also love the what's it called, not only Seven but also the Mindhunter comparisons, where it's like, you know, you have the younger wet behind the ears agent who like displays some really, really intuitive abilities that gets paired up with the older mentor figure in order to investigate this decades-long serial killer, and kind of goes down a rabbit hole of it's like, oh, are they becoming too obsessed with the case? But they even managed to put a little twist on that. I love it's everything that I love about like these types of movies. You know, serial killer
films.
Yeah, serial killer, investigative. There's also a lot of elements of True Detective in here as well, which I was a big fan of as well. Really, really enjoyed that.
I want to mention too, Silence of the Lambs is also getting discussed here because of Micah's character, similar consequences to like Jodie Foster. You know, it's great. You know, I think this is also a great Micah performance, but everyone in the cast here is phenomenal.
Yeah, Blair Underwood. Alicia Witt is not getting enough attention for this because, oh my God, the twist, especially around her character too.
Yeah, and even the performance, I didn't look it up yet. The person who's portraying that nun, oh my God.
Yeah, that's her. That's the mom.
That's her?
That's the mom. Yes, that's the mom.
I did not even recognize her.
Yeah. But again, I mean, Alicia Witt is like, she's not young anymore. For anybody who doesn't know, Alicia Witt actually, fun fact, actually appeared in David Lynch's 1984 Dune as a 9-year-old. She played Paul's younger sister, Aaliyah, who, for everybody who saw Dune 2, was portrayed by Anya Taylor-Joy, but only in a dream flashback. And also, her famously appeared in a very, not necessarily as iconic as some of the other episodes, but a very important episode, I'll say, of The Sopranos season 2, in which Christopher tries to reach out, and make his impact in the Hollywood industry, and actually meets Jon Favreau playing himself in the show. And Alicia Witt kind of portrays like the go-between between the two of them, who kind of introduces them, and they end up hooking up, and she ends up stealing a screenplay idea of his. But she's a very talented and underrated actress, and that's another thing too, is I like Oz Perkins utilizing actors and actresses who have not necessarily gotten their just desserts and their due desserts. Now, there's one piece of this movie. This movie is what I call an almost perfect movie in terms of the dread, the atmosphere, the setup, all brilliant stuff. The procedural and everything, it's all so well done. The twist of the movie, I have questions. I don't hate it, but I have questions because I don't, unlike Maxxxine, where it feels like we're getting one thing of a setup and then something completely different comes in and smashes a piece of what we thought was going to happen and kind of ruins it. This one, it's like, I don't know if the setup was well established or not. And if it was too ambiguous for my own taking. Because I go with this all the time, right? Which is where I don't mind when movies are ambiguous. But there's two different types of ambiguity with movies. There's movies that are ambiguous because it actually helps the story. And there's movies that are ambiguous just for the sake of being ambiguous. And those movies I'm not a fan of. I can't quite figure out which one of them this one was.
Right.
Because, so the whole thing about it is, there's a big rumor, especially after the opening case, in which Micah Monroe witnesses her partner on the scene get shot and then ends up taking down the perp. There's a rumor that she might have psychic abilities. And that might have something to do with the fact that, but they never really specify or focus on it. And so you're kind of led to believe, okay, she's just really, really good at her job. And then you have this tie-in with her mom. And then you have this whole thing that's connected where it's like, oh, so she was potentially one of the victims of Nicolas Cage's Longlegs character. But the whole thing that the FBI is trying to figure out is, okay, how is he killing all these people if his fingerprints aren't on the scene and if the fathers are the ones that are committing all of the murders? You know, there has to be a missing piece here. And the fact that, right, Nicolas Cage only ever has them killed on their 14th birthday. Right? So those are like kind of the two rules that are established and set up, right? Also established that Nicolas Cage is obsessed with making these very ornate, lifelike dolls that are kind of mimicking of the kid. Yeah, of the kids that are killed. So I guess the twist at the end that's revealed is that what's it called? So Micah Monroe's character is revealed to have been one of the potential victims that Nicolas Cage was stalking. That's what leads to the connection of the opening scene. But what's revealed is that her mother, stopped Cage before he was able to proceed. But in exchange for sparing her daughter's life, the mother, portrayed by Alicia Witt, agrees to help Nicolas Cage perpetrate the murders. And the way that she did this is she would bring these dolls, which would have these metal balls in them. They never really explain whether it's supposed to be hypnosis or whether it is supposed to be some actual demonic black magic, and leaves them outside the houses of these families, which would then eventually all drive them insane and cause the cause the murders, essentially. So it was essentially murder.
And I just want to clear something up.
Yeah.
So the nun I'm referring to, the one who's in complete black.
Right.
Not like I knew it was the mother in the nun outfit. I just want to clarify, like the one
in complete black. Those are the dolls that she was dropping off. The ones that Nicolas Cage was carving.
That was dressed as the nun?
Yes.
Like they were looking like a nun? Okay,
yes.
I just want to make sure I'm clarifying that. I just want to make sure.
And I'm glad you are, because I personally, I don't know if the movie did a good enough job of explaining that. Like, I feel like for anybody who's not paying very close attention, it might get a little confusing, especially given that, like, when you kind of have the exposition dump at the end where the mom is kind of explaining all of this, right? You're kind of like, wait, what? A little bit, like, okay, I'm still interested, especially since, Nicolas Cage offs himself in a very, very graphically violent and explicit scene. But I'm also like, I left a little bit like, huh? Like, what's going on here,
Yeah. So just clarifying that the mother I knew was dressing up as the nun, but not. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you knew that.
Actually in the house. That's the thing I knew. And it leads to this very tragic ending, but also is kind of a little bit like, okay, you could have prevented this because what you have to do, which is destroy the goddamn doll,
Yeah.
At that point, it might be too late for the father and the mother, but the doll, it's like, just destroy it. And then she doesn't. And then the movie just ends. And I'm like, huh? What are we doing here?
I was thinking about it when I was walking out of the movie. Does this mean like this thing? Does Micah continue on with this thing? There's a lot to question. I think the first two acts are really, really solid. But then that third act doesn't all right, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Like the scares
kind of becomes a little rushed.
It
needed a little bit more time. Yeah. It needed a little bit more time in order to really flesh itself out, in order to really set up and explain it. There needed to be more connected to each other. The brilliant twist in terms of, when they keep referring to the man downstairs, and you assume they're referring to Satan because of all the Bible worship.
Yes.
But instead it's revealed that, no, they were literally referring to Nicolas Cage was living in the basement of her mother's house. That little basement, that basement workshop was
crazy.
That twist and that setup was phenomenal. I thought that was brilliant. Pulled right out of sides of the left. But unfortunately, kind of what it does is it takes what is otherwise a fantastic, phenomenal, horrifying horror procedural and kind of turns it into a little bit of this kind of is becoming a little homage-y for homage's sake. And the plot doesn't really work as well as I thought it would, and as well as it frankly should.
No, I agree with that. I do commend how daring it tries to be sometimes, while also paying homage. But I want to put this out there. This is definitely one of the most scariest films I've seen since Hereditary, even though I think Hereditary is like a perfect horror film. But this one, so close. Yeah, so close to being a perfect horror film.
Very, very close. And I think I actually preferred this a little bit more, especially since I like the characters in this one more. Yes. I thought they were a little bit more straightforward. I thought they weren't as hokey for the sake of being hokey. There was purpose within each one of these characters. There's one scene in particular where they just let Cage be Cage. There has to be like one of those in everyone. You know what scene I'm talking about? The scene where he's in the car and he just starts screaming to the rock music, and I'm just laughing my ass off. I'm like that shit. I'm like, that's perfect. That works perfectly.
It's very Nick Cage, and as someone who's like a huge fan of Cage, I'm like, this is like what I pay money for to watch, and this is why I love him to begin with.
Yes.
So
the only other thing that I kind of have a big problem with, not as much as like the nitpicks, but that I have a big problem with, is once again they did the exact same thing that they did with Hereditary 6 years ago, when it's like, this is gonna be the scariest horror movie of the year. Micah Monroe's heartbeat is up to your BPM is gonna be above the normal amount that it should for an hour and 40, and I came out and I'm like, no, it wasn't. No, it didn't.
I mean, it was like in that interrogation scene, but to continue it throughout the rest of the film, it doesn't do that.
Yeah, I'm
you
like,
know?
stop with this bullshit, hyping us up into thinking that this is gonna be like, oh, so scary.
Yeah.
Nah, and you're not gonna fool us with that, you know?
No.
So yeah, that was kind of my only big problem with that. I'm giving this a 4. I did like it. I liked it a lot, but like I said, it's kind of the confusion that I had with the ending that prevents it from being like that 4.5, 5-star range.
Yeah, this
But still
film
really
is
solid.
really close for me for
Yeah.
being, like I said, a really great film and a really great thing, for horror. Amazing imagery that builds up to pure terrifying scenes, I will say, that are just like, if you really enjoyed Hereditary and love a good scare, then you'll probably really enjoy Longlegs. But with the execution in the end, it doesn't feel as earned, but
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, very entertaining, just like I was about Maxxine. However, this is the better film that we're talking about today. So yeah, I agree with that. Like a 4-star rating, like a B plus on my scale, because I really did enjoy the time and I was happy I saw it. I wasn't going to see this because of just everything that's been coming out recently.
Yeah.
So I was happy I saw it in the end. So and didn't think I was going to have time to see it. So very happy I saw it.
Yes, I'm glad you were. I'm glad we were able to have discussion. Before we get out of here, Kristen, so as it is the halfway point of the year, July of 2024, and only about 4 or 5 months away from the world ending as it is, what are your 5 favorite movies so far from possibly the worst year for movies for me since 2020? I didn't think it was going to be possible to get this bad again, but man, coming off those 2 strikes this year has not been pretty. So just run through your 5 favorite movies so far from this year.
I don't think this year hasn't been too bad. I just think we're just getting some, rough cuts, I think, of films that, that audiences are enjoying but not loving. I think Dune is what most of audiences really loved. But for me, I've seen a lot of great stuff from Sundance, and I'm going to say right now, coming in at number 5 for me is Pony Boy. I absolutely loved that film, and I hope it gets a 2024 release. I haven't seen anything yet, but it's a very entertaining film. It's a intersex sex worker, and it's taking place over the course of one day. I'm sure you are. I think we talked about it on here before.
We did, yes.
So that's definitely one of my favorite films. I also really enjoyed, coming in at my number 4, I'm pulling up my list, was Hitman. I wish I got to talk about it with you. I just talked about it on my podcast. Love Glenn Powell. Love seeing Richard Linklater team up again. And it's probably my favorite Linklater film I've seen in a very, very long time. So then I got to say and acknowledge Furiosa coming in as my number 3. Not as good as Mad Max, what I've been saying. We also talked about it on our podcast with you. So,
We did.
Furiosa is number 3 for me. Then The Fall Guy, which we talked about it on here.
Yes, we did.
Loved it. I think that was the great film. I gave this almost a completely perfect score. So I absolutely love that. And then also, many film fans, loved Dune. We absolutely loved it. It's a great film from Denis. Sci-fi, just an ultimate director. One of my favorites of all time. So yeah, it's no surprise.
Objectively, the movie event of the year, to say the least.
Definitely.
Yeah. So running through my 5 before, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of movies that I've seen recently that I have not gotten as much of a chance to talk about on this channel. Immaculate, still love it. Drive-Away Dolls, had a lot of fun with that. Abigail, really a big, fun horror surprise. This movie, Longlegs. Kinds of Kindness, Yorgos Lanthimos, just saw that recently. Really had a blast with it.
I didn't love it.
It's going to be more hit or miss for people depending on, which section of Yorgos. But for me, there was enough in it for me to enjoy, I'll say. And then the biggest surprise for me so far of the year, Quiet Place Day 1. Was not expecting to enjoy that movie as much as I did. But man, Leave It to Lupita and the director of Pig. Oh man, really, really good. Really solid. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
All right, now
Joseph Quinn, really great, and showing he's a bona fide movie star, I think.
Absolutely.
In those scenes.
Yes. Also, Asphalt City with Ty Sheridan and Sean Penn, greatly overlooked and was in the top 5 until it got pushed out recently. So my number 5, Mars Express, which is this low-key to the ground French Canadian collaboration animated movie that's kind of a mix between Ghost in the Shell, Blade Runner, and Her. It's absolutely phenomenal. If you guys get a chance to check it out, you should. Number 4 is Furiosa. Once again, like you said, not as good as Fury Road, but like I said, it is the first 2/3 of the last third that was Mad Max Fury Road. So I thought that was great. Number 3, Fall Guy. Once again, it's everything that I love about action, about self-aware comedy, and it's got Ryan Gosling as the perfect movie star. Number 2, this is going to be really shocking. Dune 2. That's right. It's been pushed back. I was convinced it was the number 1 of the year. I didn't think anything else was going to take its spot. It still probably could take that spot, but right now I'm still going off of the freshness of my number 1 that I saw, which actually I got an early screening for. I did not. Yes, this movie is not coming out until wide release in September, but I'm just giving a shout out now. The Substance, guys. Holy shit. What a movie. Oh my God. For anybody that saw this at Con or who knows what I'm talking about, this is a movie that stars Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. This is the best body horror movie that I've seen in a very, very long time. This movie is tense. This movie is nuts. This movie is surprising. The statements on like the feminine gaze through the guise of men and masculinity is unlike anything that I've seen recently. Absolutely. The performances are so great and so over the top. The makeup job in this is incredible. Love this movie. From start to finish, I have not been as locked in and engaged with a movie as I have been since this movie. So
I'm
definitely
very excited to see that.
Check this out when you guys get a chance. You are not going to want to. This September is low-key shaping up to be pretty awesome. You got My Old Ass. You got Megalopolis. You got Speak No Evil. You got a couple big TV shows coming back. Beetlejuice is that month. September, low-key turned it into a power month. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Hoping for a promising fall. So.
Hoping for a promising fall. Like I said, the trailers that we've gotten so far have not been disappointing, which I'm very, very excited for. So, with that being said, Kristen, thank you once again for joining me for another podcast episode. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
The good people can follow me at Miss Filmingo on Instagram, K Filmingo on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I am also the co-host of the M&K Productions podcast with one of my best friends, Mac. So shout out to Mac. And yeah, follow me on there, TikTok, all the good stuff. It's all there when you go to my Instagram profile. So thanks for having me, Dom. It's always great to come on here. You know that.
Of course, absolutely. And before I get out of here, I just wanted to do a quick shout out. R.I.P. Shannon Doherty, who unfortunately passed away today at the age of 53 from breast cancer, which I know she'd been battling for a while. Obviously, iconic roles from 90210 and Charmed, and also Mallrats as well. She will be missed.
Heathers as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And this one day, too, after Richard Simmons. Like, what is happening right now?
Lots of craziness.
Craziness. 2024.
And after yesterday.
Oh, God. Well, listen, this is
the real Civil War is happening.
Oh, God.
Alex Garland predicted it. And
Timing, to say the least. It's gonna be interesting to see how the rest of this year goes. But you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin TV Podcast across all platforms. Be sure to subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch and X if you're watching us there. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We will see you guys next time. We'll actually see us tonight for our recap of House of the Dragon, episode 5. Stay tuned.